Greetings, fellow nerds, and welcome to another episode of the Memory Core. Today is a solo episode and audio only, so no slideshow. Just sit back, relax, maybe paint some miniatures or do some cleaning, because today we're talking about clubbing. In general, my topics of preference for discussing Battletech are the miniatures or the meta of the universe. I don't spend too much time, nor do I want to, talking about my favorite designs. That's everywhere already. But I did come to this game because of the animated series. Therefore, one of my favorite mechs is the Axeman. Seriously. I have a script I never recorded about how Catalyst broke my heart putting Adam Steiner in a 1N and how infuriating it was to see mini after mini painted in that iconic yellow and black scheme. Thankfully, they did fix that. Yeah, there are those of us who name the Timberwolf or Atlas as a favorite, but that is basic. No, those of us with discerning taste appreciate the lines and silhouette of the Axeman 2N. Its V-shaped torso and broad shoulders like a bodybuilder of old. We understand that its lack of optimization is for players that love the game, can overcome challenges, and don't spend all their time whinging. Also, the delectable experience of hitting your opponent with a well-placed hatchet attack. I mean, is there really anything better or as cool in this game? And really, the rule of cool. Unfortunately, despite the cool factor, hatchets and clubbing attacks in general are not great. So yes, I am actually going to whinge a bit. Future Adam here. Turns out this script is over 3,000 words, so I whinged for more than a bit. Clubbing attacks require both hands unless you have a physical attack weapon such as a hatchet or a sword or a special pallet ability. The club attack, using a steel girder found in rubble or an uprooted tree or even a blown off limb, causes as much damage as a kick. That is quite powerful and not to be ignored. Unlike kicks, a missed attack does not incur a piloting skill roll to the attacker. However, it does not get the same to hit bonus, and the hit location uses the full table, and the arms involved cannot fire any weapons, and you have to spend time finding something to use as a club. It can certainly hurt to be hit by a club attack, but it can also sting to swing with a hatchet only to hit an undamaged leg. Might as well have kicked, which you will find to be an ongoing theme. There are definitely situations where the club/hatchet attack is the right way to go. It has greater reach, so in theory, you might be able to swat a low-flying VTOL out of the air or take a solid swing at an opponent a level above you. If your opponent is fairly damaged across the body, say from repeated hits while closing, the damage of a kick to anywhere across the body could be catastrophic to the target. If the to-hit number is uncomfortably high, a clubbing attack is easier than a punch, more difficult than a kick, but you don't have to worry about falling on your ass if you miss, especially if you have suffered actuator damage to your legs. And if you have a physical attack weapon, a sneaky mech that gets behind you can still be hit. There are even optional rules in tactical operations that allow physical attack weapons to be used to parry other physical attacks, which is certainly neat. Despite this, the math does not lie. Many times a kick is still the better option and often plays better in regards to damage per round and forcing piloting skill rolls. That second part is really important. In Battletech, piloting skill rolls can really ruin your day. We've all been there, or will be there. And few things can reliably change the pace of a game like having a mech fall. It can be just as detrimental in the early game as the late game. And I will sound like a broken record by mentioning this over and over again, but forcing PSRs is an incredibly important tactic. Because every event that would cause a roll in a phase must be rolled within that phase, and most modifiers are cumulative, it can be increasingly difficult to stay standing. So if an attack would not trigger a PSR when there is an option to do so, it better justify itself in another way. So, hatchets and clubs. Reading the rules in, say, Battletech 3rd Edition did make it equivocal. It did seem like hatchets and club attacks used the punch table. That was simply by what was written, not written, and how it was laid out in the rules. It is also what made the most sense. However, it has always been intended to use the full table, and as said earlier, few things can be as frustrating as trying to club an opponent only to hit an undamaged leg. Then you think about the weight you give up to carry a weapon such as a hatchet. This gets better in the 3050 plus era with advanced technology, but for the poor Hatchet Man in 3025, it can be rough. Without a doubt, the Hatchet Man can present itself as a significant risk for opponents in similar or lesser weight classes of the era. Unfortunately, it gives up 3 tons to carry the hatchet while having thin armor. So a hatchet weighs 1 ton for every 15 tons of the carrying unit. Imagine being a 20-ton mech, giving up 2 tons for a hatchet that causes only 4 points of damage. As if one needs an excuse for even more medium lasers. And the sword. Ugh. 1 ton for every 20 tons just to do punch damage plus 1? And there will be brackets for units carrying a sword that weigh the same as a hatchet. As a Fed Sons and Free Worlds guy, the Dracs can keep the damn thing to themselves. Now, I love the Axeman 2N, but I have to think critically here for a bit. Its 65 tons is an inefficient weight for the hatchet. That doesn't even begin to address the design quirks. Other than facing, heat status, or elevation differences, it is largely better to fire the left arm large pulse, its 3 right arm medium lasers, and kick rather than the large pulse laser and right arm hatchet attack. Designs don't have to be perfect, but one strategy does more damage and forces PSRs across 2 phases, and the other doesn't. As an aside, I would have modified the 2N to more closely match its cartoon debut and original mini. The LRM's made of 5 rapid-fire tubes a la the Atlas. The bottom ports are for a medium laser, and the 3rd laser moved to the left arm below the large pulse laser. Instant improvement, despite the loss of the right arm firing arc. As an aside to the aside, I recognize the 1N doesn't have this problem with the AC-20 being in the torso. But speaking of the 1N, maybe we should circle back to the Hatchet Man while we are on this topic. So as an aside to the aside's aside, the original Hatchet Man 3F has a medium laser in each arm and an AC-10 in the torso. Same problem here as the Axeman 2N. I can fire the left arm medium laser, AC-10, and say the right arm for a hatchet attack and generate no PSRs, or I can fire all my weapons and kick, which forces 2 PSRs on my opponent in 1 turn. Reminder, the turn has multiple phases. Yes, there are machines that are better designed in later eras that do not force the player into making detrimental choices just to use a physical attack weapon. The problem is that we continue to run into the fact that the attack method is inferior, practically having no place in the game unless you start adding loads of qualifiers. Perhaps a solid option only if you had weaker pilots who wanted to club an opponent with no risk of falling due to a missed kick, or actuator damage, or elevation changes, or heat effects, or so on and so on. But you deal with niche situations rather than general situations. Finally, there is the 100-ton Berserker. His love for you might be like a truck, but for all the good his Myomer accelerated signal circuitry is, his kick is still more fearsome than his hatchet. Props to those who get that reference, by the way. Yes, the hatchet causes 20 points of damage, resulting in a +1 PSR. A kick, however, is its own PSR. The 20 points of damage from the kick would result in the second. So that is 2 rolls at +1. And since 20 points of damage is pretty significant, there is a good chance of internal structure damage and possibly a critical hit. If you have a regular or even veteran pilot, how many of those rolls can you succeed at in a row? If there is an actuator crit, what about 3 rolls at +2? The risk that comes with attempting a kick is worth it. Again, using the full table really seems to be a nerf for clubs. The one situation where a punch location table would be used consistently with a clubbing attack would be with an elevation difference, if the attacker was 1 level above the target. Even then, it is still better to kick. Easier, same hit location table, and you force a PSR. I'm hoping you can see the problems here. The stats for physical attack weapons in specific do not do enough to justify their existence, especially since the fiction has gone out of its way to insist that the hatchet in particular has not shown itself to be a dead end. Outside of the clans, most factions found ways to use them. We see hatchets all over the inner sphere by the Jihad. And in the post-Takayid years, the 3rd Drakons of the Free Razzlehog Kung's army heavily utilized physical attack weapons and customized mechs that didn't carry them previously. You can say that the tabletop and fiction don't always have to jive, but that feels like a pretty weak argument. These things are supposed to rock. Truth be told, I am not entirely sure how to fix clubbing. The writers know this too, and the rules have not been entirely stagnant over the decades. They at least brought over some of the advanced rules and allow you to essentially aim high or low with the club attack, which makes it your choice of using the punch or kick tables. However, at a punishing +4 to hit, even with elite pilots, those modifiers can stack pretty hard. And if your mech does carry a sword, I mean, just punch. Hell, why even use a sword at all? It's dumb. I hate it, and it's dumb. Just punch twice. So the performance of club attacks on the tabletop do not match what is implied in the fiction, or, to be frank, what we would want as players, especially considering you have to increase your risk by entering into melee range. Yes, the game has always encouraged physical attacks, but advanced players will keep their distance because all it takes is one bad initiative roll to put yourself in serious trouble once in close combat. I do have ideas, and I am sure the writers have at least thought of some of them in passing, but they do certainly have their problems, and that is likely why they have not been implemented already. None of these are perfect solutions. I won't pretend they are, but worth considering. The first and most obvious is to allow club attacks to simply use the punch location table as default. Many have made the incorrect assumption that this was the way it always was. It would certainly make them more powerful, but my guess is that the writers have decided that the chance of a head hit would simply be too high, jumping from 2.78% to 16.67%. The end result would be that any mech weighing in at 60 plus tons has a head-capping weapon for relatively minimal investment. And even then, a 50-ton mech has a weapon that can be a serious threat to mechs carrying even full head armor. Then we still need to consider a weapon such as the mace. Now, mace attacks are harder to connect with, and if missed, there is a PSR to roll. On the other hand, it is more damaging, which can make mechs as low as 40 tons a major concern to an opponent's head. If using the optional weight class physical modifiers in TAC Ops, a nimble medium mech swinging a physical weapon can become very scary. So although tempting, even desirable, it is probably easy to see how letting club attacks use the punch table can become overpowered. But maybe still fair. I don't even think I would make clubbing to have the same difficulty as punching, since the longer reach of the weapon would make the attack easier. It certainly would reward the player for maneuvering for a rear attack with a 50% chance of striking the delicate rear torso armor. The 45-ton Hatchet Man could certainly break through the rear armor of most mechs with its attack in that case. It is the easiest buff to consider, really. Another thought was to allow successful clubbing attacks to force a PSR on the opponent. In many respects, this makes sense. Same damage profile as a kick. Then you give consideration the idea that lighter mechs might be out there running around causing 5 or 6 points of damage against an assault mech forcing PSRs. Then what about the anemic damage of swords? You start to see how changing one thing has knock-on effects for other weapons introduced later in the game's life. Furthermore, I do think there is something different about a kick, at least in real life. I think we've all been hit by a child with a stick, which was annoying but not the end of the world. Yet, getting a swift kick to the shin from even a little bastard like that causes us to flinch. Maybe there is something in all that force concentrated into the pointed shape of a toe box that is different. Another idea was maybe giving physical weapons a critical bonus. Perhaps the use of a large, heavy weapon with its force being focused into a relatively small area means better crushing damage or penetration once the armor is gone. Weapons of the size of a hatchet or a sword aren't going to have razor-sharp edges out of the simple fact that they would be impossible to maintain and would fracture easily, but a mech swinging a weapon like that would likely have some level of efficacy at cutting deeply. But then you have the lance and its critical effects, or the retractable blade, also special pilot abilities to consider. Again, you have this continuous knock-on effect where changing one thing affects what came after. The critical bonus would certainly be a buff for the hatchet/sword that would encourage their use, but would that then be too overpowered and stack with other weapons? Finally, an idea I came up with was a whole new hit location table. If it is thought that the punch table meant head hits far too likely for comfort, maybe a different approach was necessary. In this case, I looked at swapping some locations around with the goal of focusing on arm hits. Essentially, I flipped the locations for the arms and the legs on both the side and front tables. So, rounding up, on the front table, there would be a 39% chance of hitting an arm. And then for the side tables, a 25% chance to strike the ipsilateral arm, and over a 33% chance of hitting any arm if including the contralateral limb. That is a pretty significant jump. Leg hits conversely see a significant reduction in frequency. They are still possible, but the chance is much less. Pro, the club attacks find a focus and a specialization at attacking arms. Leg hits are still possible, which matches the increased reach of the weapons, but with a reduced frequency. Because of damage transfer rules, the club attacks continue to focus on the upper body effectively while not increasing the chance of head hits. Cons, it is a whole other table to reference, and in a game full of tables, math, and sometimes obtuse rules placement, I do fear it would make one roll their eyes at the idea of yet another thing to reference. The last thing I want to see is someone cringe at a rules change, even if it is a buff. So in the end, what do? Considering the meta of the game, some of these units are the units we have. Some of them are made objectively worse when utilizing the loadout they have. There are instances when this is intentional based on the lore and the development of the game. In others, it can be unintentionally debilitating. When playing against power gamers, it becomes less viable to utilize these designs on a map populated by Gauss rifles and clan pulse lasers. So the question becomes whether it is fair to leave club attacks so ineffectual compared to many other options, especially considering the weight investment with hatchets, swords, etc. As stated above, with the current stats, do these weapons justify their own existence sufficiently on the game table? And I would say no. Of course, house ruling any of the above is viable. Catalyst isn't going to bust your door down and prevent you from doing so, but it would be nice to see an official buff so that a player can travel from location to location and everyone is on the same page. Personally, I would just go with using the punch table and be done with it. It is the simplest fix while also being effective, and I do not think it would unbalance the game either. Yes, head hits have an increased risk, but not to the extent that it would dramatically upset the game based on my years of experience. Remember, an opponent isn't going to just let a unit close with them. Having that focus can do a lot to justify the use of club attacks and physical weapons. And I do think there is an interesting dynamic change with these physical weapon mechs being able to generate a sort of bubble around them, similar to stories of hunchbacks and atlases with their AC-20s. The only question then becomes, how do you calculate changes to battle value, and how do you add that bonus for units with head capping capability? Kicks still force a PSR, a mech can still punch with both arms if it wants, and a mech that has invested weight in a physical weapon with the time to locate a club gets a nifty bonus for taking the risk to close with its target. So that's where I'm at, but what do you think? Did I miss anything? Do you do something similar or just eschew physical weapons altogether? Am I just nuts and completely off the mark? Let me know in the comments below.